justice can never be satisfied. It's difficult to imagine a more horrific when it is finished, brings forth death. Imagine for a moment that you're watching a criminal trial on television. This guy's a bad one, and I mean really bad. He's charged with committing a terrorist act that has resulted in numerous deaths. And there's no doubt that he's the guy who committed the crime. You feel a sense of satisfaction, don't you, just knowing that he's going to pay for his crime. As you watch, the moment everyone's been waiting for finally arrives. The judge enters the courtroom. Everyone stands in reverence. Silence pervades the room. The judge reaches for his gavel. With an air of authority, he smacks the block sharply 3 times, calling the court to order. The spectators take their seats. You're riveted as the uniformed guards lead the felon into the courtroom. As you see his face, you feel again a legitimate satisfaction that he will be punished for what he did. Suspense builds as the judge stands to announce the sentence. This is it. Come on, judge, give it to him. I hereby sentence the defendant to 20 years of torture. What? Torture? Really? Now how do you feel? What just happened to your sense of satisfaction at the idea of justice being served? It's gone, isn't it? And why is it gone? Well, because you sense, as do I, that justice can never be satisfied with torture. The two things are completely at odds. You know in the bedrock of your being that inflicting torture on a person, no matter what they've done, is fundamentally wrong. Okay? So far, so good. We're thinking clearly. It's perfectly rational to categorize torture as evil. But then we're immediately faced with a massive disconnect, because the popular Christian doctrine of hell comes along and asks us to believe that God does the very thing we know to be evil. He tortures people for all eternity. Now, just in case we've forgotten how serious this doctrine is, how about a few lines from the famous Jonathan Edwards sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God? It would be dreadful, he preaches, to suffer this fierceness and wrath of Almighty God for one moment, but you must suffer it for eternity. Then he goes graphic. A boundless duration before you. You will absolutely despair of ever having any deliverance. You must wear out long ages, conflicting with this almighty, merciless vengeance. And then, when so many ages have actually been spent by you in this manner, you will know that it was all but a moment to what remains, so that your punishment will indeed be infinite. Wow, this reads like Edgar Allan Poe horror, but no, it's popular Christian doctrine. Conscious beings burning alive forever. It's difficult to imagine a more horrific idea. And it's even more difficult to imagine that a God of love would do this kind of thing to people. But is this what the Bible really teaches? Jesus said, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not," note the word, "perish, but have everlasting life. So what happens to those who do not have everlasting life? They will perish, not live in perpetual agony. The Apostle Paul says the wages of sin is death, not eternal torment. James, the Apostle, says sin, when it is finished, brings forth death, not eternal writhing in flames of torment. The last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, tells us that God will finally make a new heavens and a new earth in which there will be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying, and no more pain, which could not be said if in reality billions of lost souls are actually crying out in pain as they undergo endless torture. And think about it. What would heaven be like for the redeemed, knowing that just over yonder, or just down yonder, somewhere in God's vast universe, people are being tortured? The prophet Malachi, in the last book of the Old Testament, explicitly states to the redeemed that all evil people will be ashes under the soles of your feet. Ashes. Ezekiel, the prophet, goes so far as to quote God saying to Satan, the author of evil, "I will bring forth a fire from your midst, and never shall you be anymore." The devil himself will cease to exist rather than to suffer forever. So the Bible teaches that all who are incorrigibly evil will be justly and mercifully destroyed and cease to exist. That's hell, according to the Bible. Now granted, there are a few verses that speak of hell in terms of eternal fire. But the same Bible describes Sodom and Gomorrah suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. And then the Bible turns around and speaks of that eternal fire turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes and bringing them to destruction. So when the Bible, within its own context, speaks of eternal fire, it means forever in effect, not in duration. The fire will be eternal in its outcome, which is destruction. That's how the Bible plainly defines eternal fire. And this fits perfectly with all the other verses that say evil people will be burned to ashes. Now, no good lawyer would accept the testimony of 3 complex witnesses over 100 clear witnesses. The bottom line is, if God meets our most basic definition of justice and goodness, it's inconceivable that torturing people would figure into his character. We would regard as unjust and downright evil any justice system that would employ torture as a punishment. And then we turn around and we expect people to love and worship a God we claim does just that. It's not surprising that so many people find it impossible to believe in God when this is the picture painted for them. Thankfully, we don't need to believe it.